Search for Ball Zero. Chapter 1. A little backstory. A guy sits on a couch playing video games. His name's Tony. He lives on Earth. Population near 50 trillion. His reality might be your future. Well, really, who can say in this multiverse? He lives in the twilight of the golden age of humans on Earth, at the dawning of a new era, part of the generation of humans that get to see humanity fall from grace. Wrong place at the wrong time? Maybe it was the right place at the right time. It's hard to say. It's hard to say being anywhere at the fall of civilization is the right place, unless you're not a fan of human civilization on Earth. Actually, most people wouldn't be a fan of this consumer-driven, insatiable, keeping up with the Kardashians-like society we've built for ourselves. If you're one of those people, kick back with a beer and prepare for a wild, hilarious ride. Valley Forest was always a decent place. Your average middle-class city. There were nice places, there were not so nice places. They had all the chain stores, franchises, and restaurants, as well as a few hobos, like any suburb. So, at the time, it was pretty much a small reflection of the country. In other words, boring. Boring as shit. So utterly, brain-splatteringly boring that people would do anything to escape. 2-hour movie, a week in the bottle, an hour at the mall buying shit, an 8-hour acid trip, maybe even 20 years chasing the dragon. But no matter how people escape, they always come back to the same boring place. So they're always ready for the next escape. Sure, your iPhone gets better and the blockbuster movies have bigger, more realistic 3D explosions, man. But what happens to this nice, boring little city Tony grew up in? Well, it was really bad and really good at the same time. Tony's hometown was a boring American city, blah, 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 blah. There actually was one thing he truly loved about that place. In a sea of Best Buys, McDonald's, Walmarts, a stink... excuse me. In a sea of Best Buys, McDonald's, and Walmarts, a crazy rich dude had erected a tribute to fun in the form of a skyscraping tower. The cartoon lettering above the door said, "The best and coolest place for games in the world." And it really was. It was Treetop Games, an arcade, game store, and pizza place all rolled into one. To Tony, it defined the community as nothing else could. As you come through the valley to get to Valley Forest, Treetop Games is the only unique landmark you can see. 10 stories tall, resembling the Space Needle, rising above a leafy green circumference around the city. The tallest normal building in the city was about 5 or 6 stories, so Treetop really stood out. The tops of the biggest trees growing next to Treetop Games were less than half as tall as the structure. At first, you just see the white supports pointing up towards the sky, and you could see 1 or 2 levels nestled in all the twisting metal and the words Treetop Games in skinny blue block letters, each about to tip over. Tony went to Treetop a lot. It had been around as long as he could remember. It was filled with nostalgia. He got his first Nintendo there, his Genesis, all the way down the line of gaming consoles. Not to mention the first place he played Space Invaders, Pac-Man, Robotron, Dragon's Lair, Attack from Mars, Theater Magic, etc. This could be a very long list of games that he first played there. When Tony was a kid, a fond memory of his was being at Treetop. It was a smoky place where a lot of old smelly guys with long hair stood around these big long machines and every once in a while laughed really loud. He remembered his parents taking him to as a child. To this day, he still can't think of why his parents would go to Treetop Games. But they did, and he liked it. He didn't ask about it, he didn't care. He was along for the ride back then. Until that one day, he clearly remembered it. Tony's dad and his extra smelly friend brought back this black box type thing that hooked up to the TV. Fuck. It had black raised ridges across most of the front, and the far end was slanted up with these cool looking silver levers that you can pull up and down. It had this futuristic looking black controller with one big red button. Tony remembered looking into the dusty glass where they kept the boxes of these things. He remembered it was hot and the sun was shining down on his face through the window. He looked up and remembered running his hands along the plastic ridges, and it instantly felt familiar. Tony's dad bought an Atari that day, and later that day, Tony discovered the magic of video games. From that day on, Tony went to Treetop for himself. Beer time. Treetop is on the outskirts of Valley Forest. If you take the creatively named Main Street north, where the buildings and neighborhoods end at 41st Street, 42nd Street, there's a slight downward sloping hill that goes about a quarter mile, and Main Street ends in a T intersection. The hill isn't too steep, but it's a quarter mile long, and anyone on a bike is hauling ass, and anyone on a skateboard is hauling ass and fighting the speed wobbles. Tony did both of these many times. Oh, wait, sorry. Wait, at the end of Main Street at the T, it's called Park. Did I already say that? Oh shit, I didn't say it. At the end of Main Street, make a right at Park Street, and Treetop Games is at the end of the street on your left. Main Street and Park Street made the T. Park Street was an old part of town that basically was abandoned when Tony was young. It's a few hundred yards of old straight road that was the northernmost street in Valley Forest, beyond which was just hills and forest. When Treetop opened, there was a lot of businesses down there. Auto repair shops, medical offices, an old dog pound. Tony was too young to remember why, but all the businesses down there closed around the same time, and Treetop was the only place that stayed open. So it was always very weird. This flashy arcade surrounded by dark, chained and boarded up empty buildings and menacing barbed wire. Somehow Park Street was forgotten by Valley Forest street repairs. It was full of potholes, huge cracks, grass growing out of them. You couldn't walk down the street without twisting an ankle. Main Street was a well-maintained street, so the two streets crossed. Wait, god damn it. Main Street was a well-maintained street, so where the two streets crossed, the black, bright, new asphalt of Main Street contrasted with the old, gray Park Street. At points you could see the newer Main Street layers, stacking and overlapping older Main Streets every couple of years. Every couple of years they'd add a layer of asphalt on top, leaving Park Street farther, grayer and farther behind. Tony always thought it looked like the rings of a tree. You could see the years pass with each layer of asphalt. There were about 5 or 6 the last time Tony bothered to count. But the eccentric, rich owner of Treetop never let the government ruin his customers' fun. He always kept part of the road nice so people could get to Treetop. In fact, there was like a nice, curvy, well-lit path from the corner of Main that ran diagonally through Park Street and right up to the elevator of Treetop Games. He even added little things like a little koi pond, some benches, different plants, and posted information like a zoo. No matter what the owner of Treetop did, though, he couldn't hide the creepy, ghost town-like feel of the rest of Park Street. Over the years, the plant life slowly washed over the abandoned buildings and sprinkled itself in every nook and cranny where the seeds could grab a foothold. The trees reached out over the middle of the street, grabbing as much light as possible and hanging over the sidewalks as if to snatch unwary pedestrians. The path to Treetop was lit and clear, but the rest of Park Street was abandoned and dark. Needless to say, it was kind of spooky at night. Then throw Tony into the picture, this little kid with a giant imagination, high on caffeine and sugar, who had just spent the last 3 hours killing zombies and being chased by dragons, and now who's riding his bike through this forgotten stretch of neighborhood in the dark. A kid in that situation hears things. Just out of sight behind you, close enough to reach out and grab you, fast enough to keep up with you riding your bike at full speed. Things that make your spine tingle and leave your memory in snapshots. Things that make everything seem like a movie. Wait, it can be freaky at the time, and it sounds silly to think about it now, but was it? How silly was it? How much of a survival mechanism was it? What evolutionary adaptations poured through Tony's veins those nights, testing his fight or flight mechanics? Was his brain teaching him survival skills by suggesting something in the dark was about to grab him, even though it was perfectly safe? It's amazing how a kid's imagination can propel them to play games and act out crazy situations. In a world without danger, these games become silly and pointless. But in a world rich with danger and death, these silly games become life or death training exercises. All mammals play, in the wild, in cages, or society. As he grew up, he used every one of his little kid tricks to get his parents to take him to Treetop, and hopefully to buy him a game. What the hell? Until eventually, Tony's parents heard that games are evil and were going to turn him into a monstrous killing machine. That's when the fun really started. His parents stopped taking him to Treetop, and he had to figure out how to go by himself. Save an extra quarter from your lunch money all week by skipping the burrito and getting the cheap pizza, and then you can go on marathon gaming sessions in the dark corners of Treetop games on the weekends. Of course, having limited quarters meant you had to get better or it wouldn't last very long. Tony would get up in the foggy mornings before anyone and ride his bike down there to be the first to play the newest games. New games arrived on Saturday morning, perfect for the young video game enthusiast. Was always there, quarters in pocket. Well, no. That's where Tony met the first real friend he had in Valley Forest. One day, this other kid started showing up, right before they opened also. Who's this nerd, Tony thought. Who did he think he was? This is my arcade. One day, they were both waiting for Treetop to open. Tony said hi. Perry replied, "Hey." "Are you the one that broke my Galaga high score?" Tony asked. "Yep, 198,000, and that's just the beginning," Perry said with a friendly but competitive smile. "I'm totally going to destroy that score today," Tony shot back. And that was that. Tony and Perry quickly became best friends. Together they were the masters of all high scores in that arcade. Tony always put his initials as ASS. Perry always put his initials as BUT. So every game in that arcade was filled with ass and butt. Their own little joke. Perry had his favorite games and analyzed them to death. He shared his knowledge, as did Tony. Together, they analyzed and compounded their knowledge and therefore their friendship. Their friendship quickly added home video game consoles as they became more popular. Once Tony's parents saw them playing Duck Hunt and Super Mario Bros. On the NES, all their thoughts of gaming being evil were dispelled. One day, a couple days after they both got their first Nintendo, Tony saw Perry at school, and Perry was more excited than Tony had ever seen him. "I found a way to get unlimited lives in Super Mario!" Perry said. "What? How?" Tony thought he went off the deep end. "You hit the turtle against the wall, and you jump, and it bounces off you, and you keep doing it, and you keep getting free guys!" Tony barely understood him, so Perry grabbed a piece of paper and drew a diagram. He drew some stairs and a turtle with an arrow, meaning it was going down the stairs, and then he drew a horrible-looking Mario sitting next to the first stair. "And when he's right there, you jump!" "It's so awesome, I have to show you!" Tony knew the spot he was talking about, but couldn't picture what he was saying. They talked about it all day. Perry kept reassuring Tony it was real. This was before the internet. Video games secrets traveled by way of mouth. He told everyone, and by the time school was out, any and all gamers at the school were going home to their friend's house to try, as Perry dubbed it, the secret to life. Perry thought, once you discovered a secret, you should be able to name it, like an explorer. And that's what they did. And that's what he called it, the secret to life, because you get as many lives as you want. Made sense to him. After school at Tony's house, they popped in Super Mario Brothers. Perry let Tony try it first, coaching him until a precise moment. As the point neared, Tony could see Perry in the corner of his eye, slowly arcing and stretching his body until the exact moment. His fingers shot out of the TV, jump! While somehow from his seated position. Tony pressed A, jumped, and bounced on the turtle twice. The turtle bounced back against the wall and back at Mario, and the collision knocked him up. This happened over and over, and the bonus points kept doubling until it turned into one-ups, and soon Tony was getting extra guys for every bounce. Perry was right. He had the biggest smile, and he had found the coolest secret in the best video game at the time. From then on, finding the best secrets and bugs in games was an art form for them, and they loved it. Perry was always better at fighting games, while Tony was better at point-based games. Perry would win like Karate Champ, Ring King, Street Fighter II, all that type of stuff. Tony always had high scores on Robotron, Pac-Man, Galaga. Together they would eat through any co-op coin sucker the Treetop had. They made sure to beat every game that they had and got every fucking high score. They ruled Treetop score-wise. There were always older kids around who claimed that they owned the arcade, but Perry and Tony really did. There were multiple times Perry had to run for his life after beating older kids repeatedly on a fighting game and laughing about it. Not to mention old jackasses who were willing to take his money betting on games, but then would threaten to slap the shit right out of your face after losing money to two 12-year-olds who had just schooled them at Cyberball. They beat every game available on Nintendo and sent in pictures of themselves with their high scores to Nintendo Power magazines. This was their lives. Each day only dawned so they could get better at another game. Though they weren't the fat, rich game nerds who got their parents to drive them to Treetops and buy every game that they thought they wanted, and then go home with their Doritos and greasy fingers playing them. Tony and Perry rode their bikes to Treetops, over a mile each way. They saved every quarter they could and enjoyed every quarter, almost. And they didn't confine their interest to electronics. They still played cops and robbers, hide and seek, kick the can, you name it. Sports, not to mention all the games they made up and modified over the years, like Cha-Cha-Cha-Cha and movie statues. Treetop slowly changed over the years, but it always kept its heart. You could always buy old games for old systems there, and they were always fair trades. The majority of the place consisted of aisles of console games, game posters plastering the walls, although most of the outer walls were glass walls looking down on the surrounding city on one side, and light forest on the other. So you could walk up to the edge and look out and see the city below you and turn around and you're in aisles of games. Walk up the steps and there's an arcade and a pizza joint. It's essentially heaven for Tony and Perry. Treetop Games actually had the best view in the city. You could see the whole town. But most customers rarely enjoyed the view. Instead, they fixated on screens. When you ride the elevator up and walk through the main entrance, retail was to the left and arcade and food to the right, slightly elevated. Yep, elevator. Treetop was 10 stories tall, and there wasn't a single thing on floors 1 through 9, just like the Space Needle. You could walk up the stairs, but that had to be saved for special occasions like races and dares, not because it was pretty dangerous. Every few years there would be a story of some kid who fell off the stairs. The old rickety elevator was still the best way up. The food, nothing to write home about. But do teenage game-crazed kids care? No way. The microwave cardboard pizza was perfect. Anything else would have attracted a totally different customer. This was for them exclusively. The kitchen in Treetop looked like a 1970s pizza parlor in the 90s. Yellow trim counters with the corners ripped off so you could see the brown fake wood underneath. Gum under all the tables. After so many years, Tony actually got to know some of the gum at his favorite tables, which is kind of weird. Tony had this one piece that he would feel, and it lasted for many years. It's one of those stupid things he never told anyone about. Tony and Perry called those thoughts that you never tell anyone about alone thoughts. Just a weird little term that they came up with something that society never talks about. He checked that gum for each time he sat at that table and was sad one day it was gone. For a minute Tony wondered where it could have went. But then the thought slipped his mind, and it's such a minute memory in an overloaded world that he would never think of it again. Tony also met the woman of his dreams at Treetop Games, Elle. Her real name's Lana, but she'd punch you if you called her that. She started there as a waitress when they were both about 16 and worked there until the shit hit the fan. We'll talk about the shit hitting the fan very soon. It took Tony a few years to trick her to fall in love with him, but eventually she did. Perry and Tony were at Treetop pretty much every day. After school, when they were in school, then after work, when they were a little bit older. And if Elle was working, she would always produce exactly what they wanted before they could even ask. 2 slices of pepperoni and a Mountain Dew. She would even stay after her shift to play games with them sometimes. She was a pretty good gamer herself. She liked story-based games, not the competitive stuff Tony and Perry played. Tony would finish playing a game and then go looking for her. Inevitably, oh no, I'm Kim Jong-il. Tony would finish playing a game and then wander the arcade looking for her. And inevitably, he would find her beautiful long hair at some sort of role-playing game. She was famous for her green pants and heavy jacket. And from the back, she kind of looked like Lindsay from Freaks and Geeks. Elle and Tony had a connection right away. They both liked hard rock and heavy metal. Tony liked the weird stoner rock like Mr. Bungle, Clutch, Maximum the Hormone. Elle was more of a traditional metalhead, Slayer, Metallica, Iron Maiden, and some of that Viking metal. But their spheres of taste overlapped, and they shared a love for bands like War, Primus, Faith No More, Tool, Alice in Chains, and they went to so many amazing shows. Of course, Valley Forge had no live music venues or any reason for a rock band to ever go there, so anytime they wanted to see any of those bands, they'd have to travel to LA. Sometimes they'd drive to San Francisco. Sometimes to Vegas. It was always a great party and great times. Perry, Elle, and Tony were a threesome. But not in the way you're thinking. When they first met Elle, Perry saw Tony and Elle's instant connection over her Guar shirt, and he knew he didn't want to come between them. Bros before hoes, Perry said. All 3 of them did hang out a lot, though. And Perry probably would have fucked Elle if he could have the chance. So, bros before hoes, yeah, sure, Perry. And although Perry kind of preferred electronic music, he did like to go to the metal shows with them, mostly for the drugs and the overall pure chaotic fun that is a rock and roll mosh pit. They all had some of the best times of their lives at those shows. In those golden years, they really tried to balance epic gaming sessions with epic psychedelic metal shows. That was the perfect balance for them. One day, years before they discovered heavy metal, hanging out at Treetop, eating cheap pizza and watching an old hot dog turn, Perry and Tony noticed a spot they hadn't previously, the pinball area. At this time in Tony's world, the pinball area was a time warp to back when his dad used to take him there. Old, long-haired, skunk-smelling guys, barely moving, standing in front of these long machines, eyes quickly glancing up at the display every once in a while, seemingly in a trance, except when they lose. Then they dance around in a circle, grimacing and slam their fists on the glass. The flips and buzzards and ringers don't make it out too far of the dark pinball corner of an arcade. The screeching, beeping explosions of arcade games drown it out. The pinball area was always there, but they never noticed it until now. They both wondered why.